The stagecoach rolled into Fort Bowie, Arizona Territory, on a sweltering August afternoon in 1876, and Victoria Louise emerged with tears streaming down her face, her handkerchief already soaked through with grief and shame. She stumbled on the wooden step, nearly falling into the dust before the driver caught her elbow, and the small crowd that had gathered to watch the weekly stage arrival whispered among themselves about the weeping woman in the travel-worn blue dress. Samuel Grant stood near the general store, his hat pulled low against the blazing sun, watching the scene unfold with cautious interest because he had been told a bride would be arriving, though he had never expected her to arrive in such a state of distress. "That is her," said Mrs. Henderson, the postmaster's wife, nudging Samuel's shoulder with an unwelcome familiarity. "The mail-order bride you sent for, though I must say she looks like trouble already." Samuel said nothing, just watched as Victoria pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She was smaller than he had imagined, with chestnut hair that had come loose from its pins during the long journey, and even from this distance, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features. He had written to the matrimonial agency in St. Louis 3 months ago, more out of loneliness than any real expectation that someone would respond. His ranch needed a woman's touch, and the isolation of life, 10 miles outside Fort Bowie, had worn on him more than he cared to admit. "Are you going to just stand there, or are you going to claim your bride?" Mrs. Henderson pressed, her voice sharp with judgment. Samuel adjusted his hat and crossed the dusty street, his boots kicking up small clouds with each step. As he approached, Victoria looked up and their eyes met for the first time. Hers were a startling shade of green, red rimmed from crying and filled with such raw fear that he stopped short. "Miss Louise?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. "Yes," she whispered, then fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I am so sorry. I should not have come. I should not have deceived you." The crowd pressed closer, eager to hear scandal, and Samuel felt his jaw tighten. Whatever this woman's story was, she did not deserve to tell it in front of these gossips. He picked up her single worn carpetbag from where the driver had dropped it and gestured toward his wagon. "Come with me," he said simply. "But I must explain," Victoria protested, her voice breaking. "You do not understand what you are getting. I am not the woman you think I am." Samuel looked at her directly, seeing the genuine anguish in her expression, the way her hands trembled as she clutched her handkerchief. "Miss Louise, I do not know what happened before you got on that stage in St. Louis, and right now I do not need to. We all start fresh out here." The words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes widened, and for a moment the crying stopped as she stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot mean that." "I mean exactly that," Samuel said. "Now, it has been a long journey and you look about ready to collapse. Let me get you to the ranch, get you some food and rest, and then we can talk about whatever needs talking about." Mrs. Henderson made a disapproving sound behind them, but Samuel ignored her. He helped Victoria into the wagon, noting how light she felt, as if she had not eaten properly in weeks. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, he could feel her eyes on him, studying his profile with an intensity that spoke of desperate hope mixed with disbelief. The ride out to the ranch took nearly an hour, and for most of it, Victoria remained silent except for the occasional hiccup that followed hard crying. Samuel let the silence stretch, focusing on the familiar landscape of scrub brush and red rocks, the mountains rising in the distance like ancient guardians. He had built his ranch from nothing 5 years ago, working sunup to sundown to create something that mattered, something that would last. The house was modest but solid, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that opened onto a wide porch. The barn housed 6 horses, and the cattle grazed on 200 acres of decent grazing land that he had fought to secure and protect. "It is beautiful," Victoria said suddenly, her voice hoarse. "I have never seen anything like this landscape." Samuel glanced at her, surprised. "Most women from back east think it is too harsh, too empty." "No," she said, shaking her head. "It is honest. The land does not pretend to be anything other than what it is." There was something in the way she said it that made Samuel wonder what dishonesty she had faced, what had driven her to seek out a new life with a complete stranger in a territory that most people considered the edge of civilization. But he had meant what he said in town. Whatever her past held, she did not owe him an explanation until she was ready to give one. When they reached the ranch house, Samuel helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag inside. The interior was clean but sparse, furnished with handmade furniture and lacking any of the soft touches that women seem to favor. He showed her to the smaller bedroom, which he had prepared as best he could with fresh linens and a pitcher of water. "This is yours," he said. "I will be in the main room if you need anything. There is stew from yesterday that I can heat up for supper." Victoria stood in the doorway, looking at the simple room as if it were a palace. "You are being too kind. You do not even know what I have done." Samuel turned to face her fully, taking in the way exhaustion and fear warred in her expression. "Miss Louise, I am going to say something, and I need you to hear it. I sent for a bride because I was lonely, and because this ranch needs more than just my work to make it a home. I do not know what brought you to answer that advertisement, but you are here now. Whatever happened before, it happened before. Out here, we judge people by who they are and what they do, not by what they have already survived. But what if what I did was wrong?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if I made choices that hurt people? Did you kill anyone?" Samuel asked bluntly. "No." "Did you steal from anyone?" "No, of course not." "Then I reckon whatever else it was, we can work through it if we need to," Samuel said. "But right now, you need rest and food. The rest can wait." Victoria pressed her hands to her face, and for a moment he thought she might start crying again. Instead, she took a deep, shuddering breath and lowered her hands, meeting his eyes with something that might have been the beginning of hope. "Thank you," she said. "I never expected mercy." Samuel nodded and left her to settle in, closing the door gently behind him. In the kitchen, he stirred up the fire in the stove and set the pot of stew to heat, his mind turning over the brief conversation. Victoria Louise was clearly running from something that had wounded her deeply enough that she expected judgment at every turn. He wondered what could drive a woman to such despair. What circumstances would make marriage to a stranger in Arizona territory seem like a reasonable escape? As he sliced bread and set the table, he heard water splashing in the bedroom, the soft sounds of someone washing away travel dust. When Victoria emerged 20 minutes later, she had changed into a simple gray dress and pinned up her hair, though loose strands still framed her face. She looked younger with her face clean, probably no more than 22 or 23, and there was a fragility to her that made Samuel want to promise that nothing would harm her here. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the table. "It is not fancy, but it is filling." They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Samuel watched as Victoria slowly relaxed, her shoulders dropping from their defensive hunch. She ate carefully, as if unused to having enough food, and he made a mental note to ensure she got proper meals from now on. "How long have you had this ranch?" Victoria asked finally, breaking the silence. 5 years, Samuel replied. "Came out here after the war looking for a place that was not full of ghosts." "Did you fight?" 4 years with the Union cavalry, he said. "You?" "My father fought for the Confederacy," Victoria said quietly. "He did not come home." Samuel nodded slowly. A lot of fathers did not come home, on both sides. Yes, she said, and there was a weight of grief in that single word that spoke of more than just a father's death. They finished the meal, and Samuel cleared the dishes while Victoria sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of water. The sun was setting outside, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and in the fading light, the harsh landscape softened into something almost beautiful. "Mr. Grant," Victoria said suddenly, and he turned to face her. "I need to tell you what happened. I cannot let you continue being kind without knowing." Samuel dried his hands on a towel and sat back down at the table. "All right, I am listening." Victoria took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the cup. "After my father died, we had nothing. My mother and we were left with debts that we could not pay. My mother became ill and the medicine she needed was expensive. There was a man in St. Louis, a wealthy man who owned several businesses. He offered to help us to pay for everything, but he wanted something in return." Samuel felt his stomach tighten, guessing where this story was leading. "I became his mistress," Victoria said, the words falling like stones. "For 2 years I lived in a house he provided, wore dresses he bought, and allowed him to visit whenever he pleased. My mother never knew. She thought I had found work as a seamstress and that we were simply fortunate. She died 6 months ago, never knowing what I had done to save her." Tears were sliding down Victoria's cheeks again, but she kept talking, as if now that she had started, she could not stop. "After she died, I wanted to leave, but he would not let me. He said I belonged to him, that I owed him for everything he had provided. I finally managed to escape 3 months ago, but I had nowhere to go. No respectable family would take me in if they knew the truth, and I had no way to support myself. I saw the advertisement from the matrimonial agency, and I thought perhaps in a place far from St. Louis, I could have a different life, but I should have told you the truth in my letters. I should have given you the choice to refuse me." Samuel sat quietly for a long moment, processing what she had told him. It was not an unfamiliar story, unfortunately. He had seen too many women forced into impossible situations by circumstances beyond their control, too many lives destroyed by war and poverty and the selfishness of powerful men. "Did he hurt you?" Samuel asked finally. Victoria looked startled by the question. "He never struck me, if that is what you mean, but he was not kind. He treated me as a possession, not a person. And you did all of that to save your mother?" "Yes," Victoria whispered. "She was all I had left. I would have done anything to keep her alive." Samuel leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "Miss Louise, what you did was an act of love and sacrifice. You gave up your own happiness, your own future, to care for your mother. That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to be respected." Victoria shook her head violently. "No, decent women do not do what I did. I sold myself. I am ruined." "You survived," Samuel said firmly. "You did what you had to do in circumstances that were not of your making, and when you had the chance, you took your freedom and built a new life. That takes courage, Miss Louise, real courage." "But I lied to you in my letters," Victoria protested. "I let you believe I was something I am not." "Who did you tell me you were?" Samuel asked. Victoria blinked at him, confused. "I told you I was 23 years old, that I had worked as a seamstress, that my parents were both deceased, and that I wanted a fresh start in the West." "All of which is true," Samuel pointed out. "You are 23. You did work as a seamstress, at least that is what you told your mother. Your parents are deceased, and you do want a fresh start. You did not lie, Miss Louise. You just did not tell me every detail of your life, which, given we were strangers, seems perfectly reasonable." Victoria stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. "How can you be so calm about this? I am not a proper bride. I am not even a respectable woman." Samuel reached across the table and covered her hand with his. It was the first time he had deliberately touched her, and he felt her stiffen before slowly, tentatively, relaxing. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "I have lived through a war that killed over half the men I served with. I have seen good people do terrible things and terrible people prosper while the innocent suffered. I have learned that survival itself is an accomplishment, and that kindness and courage can exist in the most unexpected places. What I see in front of me is a woman who sacrificed everything for someone she loved, who endured something difficult and painful, and who had the strength to walk away and seek a better life. That is exactly the kind of woman I want beside me. That is exactly the kind of woman who can build a life worth living in a place as harsh as this." Victoria was crying again, but this time the tears seemed different, as if some of the poison that had been eating at her soul was finally draining away. "I do not deserve your kindness." "Maybe not," Samuel said with a slight smile. "But you are getting it anyway. That is how starting fresh works, Miss Louise. You let go of what was and begin building what will be. And out here, what matters is not where you came from, but where you are going." They sat there in the growing darkness, hands touching across the table, two people wounded by life but willing to try again. Samuel felt something shift in his chest, something he had thought dead since the war, a tentative hope that perhaps loneliness did not have to be permanent, that perhaps two broken people could help each other heal. Over the following days, a careful routine developed. Samuel woke before dawn to tend to the horses and cattle, while Victoria took over the housekeeping and cooking. She proved to be an excellent cook, far better than Samuel, and she attacked the neglected house with a determination that spoke of her need to prove her worth. They spoke carefully to each other, polite and considerate, both aware that they were building something fragile that could easily shatter. Samuel found himself watching Victoria when she was not looking, noticing the way she moved with unconscious grace, the way she hummed softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. She had a quick intelligence that revealed itself in small ways, in the clever solutions she found to household problems, in the thoughtful questions she asked about the ranch and the land. And there was a strength in her that had been forged in fire, a resilience that refused to break no matter how bent she had been. Victoria, for her part, found herself surprised by Samuel at every turn. He was nothing like the man in St. Louis who had controlled every aspect of her life. Samuel asked her opinion on things, listened when she spoke, and treated her with a respect that she had almost forgotten was possible. He was quiet but not cold, reserved but not distant, and there was a fundamental decency to him that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in years. "Why did you send for a bride?" Victoria asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had been a week since her arrival, and the question had been building in her mind. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "I was tired of being alone," he said finally. "I built this ranch thinking it would be enough, thinking that hard work and purpose would fill the empty spaces. But it turns out you cannot talk to cattle, and horses make poor company when the nights get long. I wanted someone to share this life with, someone to make it all mean something more than just survival." "You could have found someone locally," Victoria pointed out. "There are women in Fort Bowie." "Not many," Samuel said with a slight smile. "And most of the unmarried ones are already spoken for or young enough to be my daughter. Besides, the women here know me. They know I am just a rancher with more stubbornness than sense, trying to make a go of it in difficult country. I thought maybe someone from back east, someone looking for a fresh start, might see possibilities instead of just hardship." "And do I?" Victoria asked softly. See possibilities. Samuel turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were impossibly blue. I hope so. Because I see them in you. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Victoria felt her heart begin to beat faster, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. This was different from anything she had experienced before. The man in St. Louis had wanted possession. Samuel wanted partnership. I see them too, she whispered. The following Sunday, Samuel suggested they go into Fort Bowie for church services. Victoria had been avoiding the town since her arrival, still ashamed of how she had broken down in front of everyone, but Samuel insisted. People are going to talk no matter what we do, he said practically. Might as well give them the truth to talk about instead of letting them make up stories. The church was a simple wooden building at the center of town, and when Samuel and Victoria arrived, every head turned to watch them walk in. Victoria felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her, the whispers that followed in their wake, but Samuel kept his hand on the small of her back, steady and reassuring. They sat in a pew near the back, and Victoria tried to focus on the minister's words rather than the stairs. The sermon was about redemption and second chances, and Victoria wondered if God himself was trying to tell her something. When the service ended, several women approached, curiosity overcoming propriety. Mrs. Grant, said a plump woman with graying hair, I am Clara Thompson. I run the boarding house. We did not get a proper introduction when you arrived. I apologize for that, Victoria said quietly. The journey was longer and more difficult than I expected. Of course it was, dear, Clara said warmly. I traveled from Missouri myself 20 years ago, and I remember how overwhelming it all seemed. You must come to the ladies' social next week. We meet every Tuesday at the church. Victoria glanced at Samuel, who nodded encouragingly. I would like that, thank you. More introductions followed, and while Victoria could see calculation in some eyes, most of the townspeople seemed willing to accept her at face value. She was Samuel Grant's bride, and Samuel was respected in Fort Bowie. That carried weight. On the ride back to the ranch, Victoria felt lighter than she had in months. They were kinder than I expected, she admitted. Most people are kind if you give them the chance, Samuel said. And the ones who are not, well, their opinions do not matter much anyway. You have a very sensible way of looking at things, Victoria observed. Samuel grinned, and it transformed his usually serious face. My mother used to say I had all the romance of a fence post. Practical to a fault, she called it. I like it, Victoria said honestly. Practical feels safe after so much uncertainty. As August turned into September, Victoria began attending the ladies' social at the church, slowly building friendships with the other women in Fort Bowie. Clara Thompson took her under her wing, introducing her to everyone, and smoothing over any awkward moments with practiced ease. Victoria learned that Fort Bowie, despite being small and isolated, had a thriving community of people who looked out for each other. At the ranch, the careful politeness between Samuel and Victoria began to evolve into something deeper. They talked more freely now, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for the future. Samuel told her about growing up in Ohio, about joining the army at 18 full of idealistic fervor, about the slow disillusionment that came with witnessing the brutal reality of war. Victoria told him about her childhood before the war, about her father who had been a schoolteacher, about the music and laughter that had filled their home before everything changed. You ever miss it? Samuel asked one evening as they worked together in the kitchen, Victoria washing dishes while he dried. The city, the conveniences, Victoria considered the question seriously. I miss some things. Music mostly. My mother loved to sing, and there were concerts sometimes that we would attend. But I do not miss the crowds or the way everyone watched everyone else, waiting for any sign of weakness or scandal. Here, there is space to breathe, space to be yourself without constantly performing for others. There is plenty of space here, Samuel agreed. Sometimes too much. It can make a person feel small, insignificant. Or it can make you feel free, Victoria countered. It depends on your perspective. Samuel looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. How did you become so wise? I am not wise, Victoria said, feeling her cheeks flush. I just learned to look for light in dark places. When you have nothing, you either find hope or you give up. I chose hope. I am glad you did, Samuel said quietly. I am very glad you did. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Samuel reached out slowly, giving Victoria every chance to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, and Victoria found herself leaning into the touch, starved for gentle affection. Victoria, Samuel said, his voice rough. May I kiss you? The fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice, made Victoria's eyes sting with tears. Yes, she whispered. The kiss was soft and careful, a question rather than a demand. Samuel's lips were warm against hers, and Victoria felt something inside her chest crack open, letting in light after years of darkness. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Samuel rested his forehead against hers. I have been wanting to do that for weeks, he admitted. I have been hoping you would, Victoria said, and then laughed at her own boldness. From that night forward, the physical distance between them began to close. Samuel would take Victoria's hand when they walked, or rest his arm around her shoulders when they sat on the porch in the evenings. Victoria would lean against him, soaking up the warmth and solidity of his presence. They were building towards something, both of them aware that their arrangement would eventually need to become a true marriage, but neither willing to rush what was developing naturally between them. In late September, trouble arrived in the form of a telegram. Samuel returned from town with a grim expression, and Victoria knew immediately that something was wrong. What is it? She asked, setting down the shirt she had been mending. Samuel handed her the telegram, and Victoria read it with growing horror. It was from the matrimonial agency in St. Louis, informing them that a man named Robert Callahan had been making inquiries about Victoria's whereabouts, claiming to be her guardian and insisting that she had been taken against her will. He found me, Victoria whispered, her face draining of color. He is looking for me. Samuel took the telegram back, his jaw set in a hard line. He has no legal claim on you. You are an adult woman who made her own choice to come here. You do not understand, Victoria said, her voice rising with panic. He is powerful, wealthy. He knows judges and politicians. If he wants to find me, he will find me, and there is nothing I can do to stop him. There is something we can do, Samuel said firmly. We can get married. Not just an arrangement, but a legal marriage. Once you are my wife, he has no standing to claim any authority over you. Victoria stared at him. You want to marry me just to protect me? I want to marry you because I care about you, Samuel corrected. Because over the past month and a half, you have become essential to my life in ways I did not expect. Because when I imagine the future, you are in it. This just gives us a reason to make official what I was already hoping for. But we have not, Victoria hesitated, blushing. We have not even discussed if you truly want me as a wife, not just as a housekeeper or a companion, but as a wife in all ways. Samuel crossed the room and took both her hands in his. Victoria Louise, I want you in every way. As a partner, as a companion, as a wife to share my bed and my life. I want to build a future with you, to have children with you if you are willing, to grow old together watching sunsets from that porch. I am not saying this out of obligation or pity. I am saying it because somewhere in the past 6 weeks, I have fallen in love with you." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time since arriving in Fort Bowie, they were tears of joy rather than grief. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I did not think I could ever feel this way, but I love you, Samuel Grant. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see good in me when I cannot see it myself." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "Then marry me, tomorrow if the minister will do it. We will make it legal and binding, and if this Robert Callahan comes looking for you, he will find a married woman with a husband who will protect her with everything he has." "Yes," Victoria said against his shoulder. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married the next afternoon in the small church, with Clara Thompson and her husband standing as witnesses. Victoria wore a simple cream-colored dress that Clara had helped her alter from one of the pieces in her limited wardrobe, and Samuel wore his best shirt and a string tie. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Victoria with a tenderness that made Clara dab at her eyes with her handkerchief. That night, in the privacy of their home, Samuel carried Victoria across the threshold of what had been his bedroom and was now theirs. He set her down gently, his hands trembling slightly. "If you need more time," he started, but Victoria placed her fingers on his lips. "I do not need more time," she said softly. "I need you. I need to replace every bad memory with new ones, every moment of feeling powerless with moments of choosing this, choosing you." Samuel kissed her fingers, then her palm, then her wrist, working his way up her arm with patient devotion. "Then we go at your pace. You tell me what you need, and if you want to stop at any time, we stop. No questions, no judgment." It was that promise, that absolute respect for her autonomy, that allowed Victoria to fully open herself to him. Their lovemaking was slow and gentle, Samuel constantly checking her reactions, making sure every touch brought pleasure rather than pain. Victoria discovered that intimacy born of love was entirely different from what she had endured before. This was mutual, joyful, a celebration of connection rather than an exercise in possession. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Victoria's head on Samuel's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Samuel asked, his fingers trailing through her hair. "For making me feel clean again, for making me feel like I am not broken." Samuel tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "You were never broken, Victoria. Bent, maybe, wounded, certainly, but not broken. You are the strongest person I know." Victoria kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture, and Samuel responded with equal passion. They made love again, and this time Victoria felt truly free, unshackled from her past and fully present in the beautiful reality of her new life. The following weeks brought a deepening of their bond. Samuel taught Victoria to ride properly, not just sitting sedately in a wagon but actually handling a horse. She proved to be a quick learner, fearless once she understood the basics, and they began taking long rides together across the ranch, Samuel showing her every corner of the land that was now hers as much as his. Victoria threw herself into improving the ranch house, using some of the small savings she had managed to hide from Robert Callahan to order curtains and rugs from the general store's catalog. She planted a small garden near the house, determined to have fresh vegetables next spring. She also began teaching Samuel to read better, discovering that he had only basic literacy and had been too embarrassed to admit it. "I learned enough to get by in the army," he explained, shamefaced, "but I was never much good at it." "Then we will work on it together," Victoria said firmly. And I will not hear any more about what you are not good at. You are good at many things, Samuel Grant. You just need practice with this one." In October, a letter arrived at the ranch, forwarded through the matrimonial agency. Victoria recognized the handwriting immediately and felt her stomach drop. It was from Robert Callahan. Samuel read the letter over her shoulder, his expression growing darker with each line. Callahan wrote that he knew where Victoria was, that he considered her decision to leave theft since he had invested so much in her, and that he was prepared to pursue legal action to recover his property and the money he claimed she owed him. "He cannot do that," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Can he? He can try," Samuel said grimly, "but he will not succeed. You owe him nothing, Victoria. What he did was exploitation, not a legitimate business arrangement." "But he has lawyers' connections," Victoria protested. "And we have the truth," Samuel countered. "And we have each other. We are not going to hide from this man, Victoria. We are going to face him head-on." Samuel rode into Fort Bowie the next day and sent a telegram to a lawyer friend from his Army days who had settled in Tucson. Within a week, James Morrison arrived at the ranch, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s who listened to Victoria's story without judgment before pronouncing his verdict. "He has no legal standing," James said firmly. "The relationship you described was immoral and exploitative, but it was not a legal contract. You owed him nothing when you left, and you owe him nothing now. If he pursues this, we can counter with charges of coercion and fraud. Given your current status as a married woman, and given that this is Arizona territory and not Missouri, I would say his chances of success are approximately zero." "But he is wealthy," Victoria repeated. "Does that not matter?" "Money matters less out here than it does back east," James said with a slight smile. "The territorial courts are not as easily influenced as he might expect, and judges tend to be unsympathetic to men who try to claim ownership of women. We abolished slavery, after all. The precedent is firmly against him." Victoria felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. "So I am truly free." "You are truly free," James confirmed. "I will draft a letter making our position clear. Once he understands the legal reality, I suspect he will give up. Men like that are bullies, and bullies tend to back down when they meet real resistance." James's prediction proved accurate. A month later, they received a terse letter from Callahan's lawyer, stating that their client was withdrawing his claim and would not pursue the matter further. Victoria cried when she read it, overwhelmed with relief, and Samuel held her until the storm passed. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "You are safe. We are safe." Winter came to Arizona territory, bringing cooler temperatures but rarely any snow at their elevation. Victoria discovered that she loved the winter landscape. The way the red rocks stood out even more vividly against pale blue skies. The crispness of the air that made everything feel clean and new. Christmas brought an invitation to a celebration at the church, and Victoria threw herself into preparations. She baked pies and cookies, sewed new shirts for Samuel, and even managed to find yarn to knit him a muffler. Samuel, in turn, surprised her with a piano that he had secretly ordered from back east, arranged through Clara Thompson, so Victoria would not find out. When it arrived 2 days before Christmas, carried with great difficulty by 4 men from town, Victoria actually squealed with delight, an undignified sound that made Samuel laugh with pure pleasure. "How did you know?" she asked, running her hands over the polished wood. "You mentioned once that you missed music," Samuel said. "And I have heard you humming to yourself when you think I am not listening. I thought maybe if you had a piano you could play again, make music instead of just remembering it." Victoria threw her arms around his neck and kissed him thoroughly. You are the most wonderful man who ever lived. I will remind you of that next time I track mud through your clean kitchen, Samuel teased. The piano brought new dimension to their evenings. Victoria would play while Samuel sat nearby, mending tack or sharpening tools, both of them content in the domestic harmony they had built. Sometimes Victoria sang, her voice clear and sweet, and Samuel would stop working just to listen, marveling that this woman, this music, this life were all his. In February, Victoria realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid to jinx it with words. But when a third month passed and morning sickness began, she could no longer deny the truth. "Samuel," she said one evening after supper, her hands twisting nervously in her lap, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the book she had been helping him read, immediately alert to her tone. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Victoria said quickly. "At least, I do not think it is wrong, but I am nervous about telling you because I do not know how you will feel." Samuel set the book aside and came to kneel in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "Victoria, you can tell me anything. Whatever it is, we will handle it together." "I am pregnant," Victoria said, the words coming out in a rush. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Samuel just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile Victoria had ever seen, joy radiating from him like sunlight. "A baby," he said, his voice wondering. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Victoria said, her own smile matching his. "In late summer, I think. August or early September." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "This is the best news I have ever received." "The absolute best. We are going to be parents, Victoria." "Are you happy?" Victoria asked, even though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Samuel said. "I am thrilled, terrified, grateful, amazed. I love you so much, Victoria Grant. Thank you for this. Thank you for everything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the summer heat made the final months challenging. Samuel hovered protectively, insisting that Victoria rest frequently, bringing her cool drinks and fanning her when the temperature climbed. Clara Thompson and the other women from town visited regularly, bringing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and sharing their own pregnancy stories. "You are going to be fine," Clara assured Victoria during a particularly difficult day in August, when the baby seemed determined to press on every uncomfortable part of Victoria's body. "First babies always make you think you cannot do it, but you will. Women are stronger than we look." Victoria laughed despite her discomfort. "I hope you are right." The baby came on a sweltering afternoon in late August 1877, almost exactly 1 year after Victoria had arrived in Fort Bowie. Clara attended the birth, along with the doctor from town, while Samuel paced outside, wearing a path in the porch boards with his nervous energy. The labor was long and difficult, but when Victoria finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of pain became worthwhile. "It is a boy," Clara announced, bringing the cleaned and wrapped infant to Victoria. "A healthy, perfect boy." Victoria took her son with trembling hands, staring down at the tiny face in wonder. He had a shock of dark hair and was already waving his small fists in outrage at the indignity of being born. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mother." Samuel was allowed in moments later, and when he saw his wife holding their son, tears ran unashamedly down his face. "He is beautiful," Samuel said hoarsely. "You are both beautiful." They named him Samuel Thomas Grant, but quickly began calling him Tom to avoid confusion. Tom proved to be a healthy, loud baby who demanded attention and gave it freely in return. Samuel was a devoted father, walking the floor with Tom at night when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with obvious besotted wonder. "I never imagined I could feel this way," Samuel admitted one night as they both sat watching Tom sleep in his cradle. "Like my heart is walking around outside my body." "I know exactly what you mean," Victoria said softly. "Sometimes I look at him and I cannot believe he is real, that we made him, that he is ours." "We did well," Samuel said, pulling Victoria close. "We did very well." As Tom grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Samuel expanded the herd and hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload. Victoria's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables that she learned to preserve for winter. The piano remained a centerpiece of their home, and Tom's earliest memories would be of his mother playing while his father sang along in his slightly off-key voice. When Tom was 3, Victoria became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. In the spring of 1881, she delivered a healthy daughter they named Sarah Virginia Grant, after Samuel's mother and Victoria's middle name. Sarah was a calm baby, the opposite of her boisterous brother, and she watched the world with serious gray eyes that seemed to take in everything. Tom was initially suspicious of the interloper who took his parents' attention, but Samuel patiently explained that being a big brother was an important job, and soon Tom was boasting to anyone who would listen about his baby. The years passed in a blur of happiness punctuated by the normal challenges of ranch life. There were hard winters and droughts, cattle that got sick and crops that failed, but through it all, Samuel and Victoria faced everything as a team. Their love, which had begun tentatively in the midst of grief and fear, had grown into something unshakable, a foundation on which they built not just a family but a legacy. On their 10th anniversary, Samuel took Victoria back to Fort Bowie for a celebration dinner at Clara's boarding house. The town had grown over the decade, with new businesses and homes, but Clara's place remained the social center. As they sat at the table, surrounded by friends who had become family, Samuel raised his glass. 10 years ago, a woman arrived on the stage crying about her past, and I told her we all start fresh out here. I had no idea then that I was welcoming the love of my life, the mother of my children, the person who would make every day better just by being in it. Victoria, you took a chance on a lonely rancher in the middle of nowhere, and you gave me everything I never knew I needed. Here is to the next 10 years, and the 10 after that, and as many more as we are blessed to share. Victoria's eyes glistened with tears, but they were the good kind, the kind that came from overwhelming happiness. And here is to the man who taught me that starting fresh was not just about escaping the past, but about building a future worth living. I love you, Samuel Grant. Today, tomorrow, and always. Their children grew into fine young people. Tom inherited his father's practical nature and love of ranching, learning from an early age how to work the land and care for the animals. Sarah proved to have her mother's artistic temperament and quick mind, spending hours at the piano and devouring every book she could get her hands on. In 1885, when Tom was 8 and Sarah 4, Victoria surprised everyone by announcing a 3rd pregnancy. Samuel was overjoyed despite his worry about Victoria's age. She was now 32, but the doctor assured them that she was healthy and strong. In early 1886, they welcomed twin boys, James and Joseph, named after Samuel's Army friend James Morrison, who had helped secure Victoria's freedom, and Joseph, which was Samuel's father's name. The twins were a handful, energetic and mischievous, keeping Victoria constantly busy. But with Tom and Sarah old enough to help, and Samuel as devoted as ever, the household managed. The ranch continued to thrive, now employing 5 ranch hands and becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. As Arizona moved toward statehood, Samuel became involved in local politics, serving on various committees and councils. Victoria used her education and intelligence to help him navigate the complex negotiations and compromises required, becoming a respected voice in her own right. Together, they advocated for schools and infrastructure improvements, working to build a territory that would provide opportunities for their children and others. One afternoon, in 1895, Victoria sat on the porch watching Samuel teach the twins, now 9 years old, how to rope a fence post. Tom, now 18, was out with the ranch hands moving cattle to fresh grazing, and Sarah, at 14, was inside practicing piano. Victoria's hair had threads of silver now, and there were lines around her eyes and mouth, but they were laugh lines, markers of joy rather than sorrow. Clara Thompson, now in her 70s but still spry, climbed the porch steps and settled into the chair beside Victoria with a satisfied sigh. "I remember when you first arrived," Clara said without preamble, "crying your heart out, looking like the world had beaten you down." "I was broken then," Victoria said quietly, "or I thought I was." "You were never broken," Clara corrected, echoing words Samuel had said long ago. "You were wounded, but wounds heal if you give them the chance. Look at you now. 4 beautiful children, a successful ranch, a husband who still looks at you like you hung the moon. You built something remarkable, Victoria." "We built something remarkable," Victoria corrected. "Samuel and I together. And with the help of good friends like you who gave me a chance when you had no reason to." "Oh, I had reason," Clara said with a chuckle. "I saw how Samuel looked at you even that first day. That man was in love before he even knew your middle name. I just gave you a little push in the right direction." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Samuel laugh as James managed to rope the post while Joseph's rope sailed wide. Victoria thought about the girl she had been, desperate and ashamed, willing to travel across the country to escape her past. She thought about the kindness of a cowboy who had seen her pain and offered acceptance instead of judgment. And she thought about the life they had built together, a life richer and fuller than she had ever imagined possible. "You ever regret it?" Clara asked suddenly. "Coming out here, marrying a stranger," Victoria smiled. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I was meant to be." As the sun began to set, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and gold, the family gathered for supper. The table was crowded and noisy, with the twins arguing over nothing, Sarah describing a new piece she was learning, and Tom discussing plans for a new barn. Samuel sat at the head of the table, Victoria at the foot, and their eyes met frequently across the chaos, speaking volumes without words. After the children were in bed, Victoria and Samuel returned to their usual spot on the porch, Victoria tucked against Samuel's side, his arm around her shoulders. "Happy?" Samuel asked, as he often did. "Completely," Victoria answered, as she always did. "Good," Samuel said, kissing the top of her head, "because you deserve every bit of happiness this life can offer." Victoria tilted her face up to kiss him properly. "We both do. We both deserve this." The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Tom married a local girl named Margaret when he was 23, and they built a house on the far corner of the ranch property. Sarah attended a teacher's college in Tucson before returning to Fort Bowie to teach at the local school. The twins, always inseparable, went into business together, opening a hardware store in town that quickly became successful. Samuel and Victoria watched their children grow and flourish with pride, knowing that they had given them something precious. a stable, loving home filled with respect and kindness. The ranch, now managed primarily by Tom with Samuel's guidance, continued to prosper, becoming one of the cornerstone operations in what was now the state of Arizona, admitted to the Union in 1912. On their 25th anniversary in 1901, the entire family gathered for a celebration. Grandchildren now ran through the house that Victoria had turned into a home, their laughter echoing off the walls. Samuel, now 52 with more gray than brown in his hair, stood and cleared his throat for a toast. 25 years ago, I was a lonely man with a ranch and not much else. Then a brave woman stepped off a stage, tears running down her face, and I said the truest words I have ever spoken. We all start fresh out here. Victoria, you took that chance to start fresh, and you gave me a fresh start too. You gave me love, partnership, family, and purpose. You took a house and made it a home. You took a man and made him better. I could never thank you enough for saying yes to this life. Victoria rose and went to her husband, taking his hands in hers. And I could never thank you enough for seeing past my tears to the person I could become. For giving me not just a second chance, but a true life. You taught me that the past does not define us, that we are shaped by what we choose to do with our tomorrows. I love you, Samuel Grant. I have loved you since the moment you said we all start fresh out here, and I will love you until my last breath. They kissed, to the applause and good-natured catcalls of their family, and in that moment, surrounded by love, Victoria felt the last shadow of her old shame finally dissolve. She was Victoria Grant, wife and mother, rancher and teacher, respected member of the community. The frightened girl who had arrived crying had long since been replaced by a woman who knew her worth. As the evening wound down and the family departed to their various homes, Samuel and Victoria once again found themselves on the porch, the place where so many of their important conversations had happened over the years. "You remember that first night?" Victoria asked. "When I told you about my past and waited for you to reject me. I remember thinking that you were the bravest person I had ever met," Samuel said. "To have survived what you did and still have the courage to try again, that took real strength." "I did not feel brave," Victoria admitted. "I felt terrified. Bravery is not the absence of fear," Samuel said. "It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You did that then, and you have done it every day since." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his body against hers. "We did well, did we not? With our life, with our children, we did better than well," Samuel said firmly. "We built something beautiful and lasting. We created a family that knows how to love and work and stand together. That is more than most people manage." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead, the vast Arizona sky spreading out in all its glory. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and cattle lowed softly in their sleep. The sounds of the ranch of home surrounded them like a blessing. The years continued their steady march forward. Samuel and Victoria grew older together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They watched their grandchildren grow, saw some of them take over various aspects of the ranch operations, saw others head off to pursue different dreams in the changing modern world. In 1925, at the age of 72, Victoria published a memoir about her experiences coming west as a mail-order bride. She had written it slowly over several years, encouraged by Sarah, who insisted that her mother's story of redemption and second chances needed to be shared. The book, titled Starting Fresh, became a modest success, with women writing to Victoria from all over the country, thanking her for giving voice to their own struggles and hopes. Samuel, now 76 and moving more slowly but still sharp as ever, read every word of the memoir with tears in his eyes. "I am so proud of you," he told Victoria after finishing it, "for having the courage to tell your story, for being willing to be vulnerable so others might find hope." "It is our story," Victoria corrected. "You are on every page, even when I am not explicitly writing about you. You are the foundation of every good thing that came after." In the spring of 1928, Samuel fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of doctors, his body, worn out from decades of hard ranch work, could not fight off the infection. Victoria sat beside his bed day and night, holding his hand, remembering their life together in quiet whispers. "No regrets," Samuel said on what would be his last day, his voice weak but his eyes still bright when he looked at his wife. "Not a single one. You gave me a beautiful life, Victoria. You gave me life itself," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me when I could not save myself." "We saved each other," Samuel corrected gently. "That is how love works. It is not one person rescuing another. It is two people choosing each other every day and building something neither could have built alone." He died peacefully that night, surrounded by his family, Victoria's hand clasped in his. She felt the moment he left, felt the absence of his spirit like a physical blow, and for the first time in decades, she wept with the raw grief she had carried when she first arrived in Fort Bowie all those years ago. But even in grief, Victoria understood that this was different from before. Then, she had been crying about shame and loss and hopelessness. Now, she cried from love, from gratitude for what they had shared, from the pain of parting but also the certainty of having been truly loved and cherished. The funeral drew people from all over Arizona. Samuel had been respected not just as a successful rancher, but as a fair and honest man who had contributed to building the state. But it was the simple gravestone that Victoria chose that said the most. Samuel Grant, 1852, 1928. Beloved husband, father, and friend, he taught us all to start fresh. Victoria lived another 7 years after Samuel's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and engaged with the world. She continued to write, to play piano, to share her story with anyone who wanted to hear it. And she always spoke of Samuel with love and gratitude, making sure that everyone knew what an extraordinary man he had been. On a warm August afternoon in 1935, 59 years almost to the day after she had first arrived in Fort Bowie, Victoria Louise Grant died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. Her children gathered to bury her beside Samuel, and on her gravestone they carved words that Victoria herself had requested. Victoria Louise Grant, 1853–1935, beloved wife, mother, and teacher, she learned to start fresh and taught others to do the same. The ranch continued through the generations, passed down through Tom's line, each generation honoring the legacy of Samuel and Victoria Grant. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived crying and the cowboy who offered her a fresh start became family legend, told and retold to teach about courage, compassion, and the transformative power of love. The piano that Samuel had given Victoria remained in the family, passed to Sarah and then to her daughter, and even a century later, someone in the Grant family could usually be found playing it, filling the air with music that Victoria had loved. The ranch house itself, expanded and modernized over the years but maintaining its core structure, still stood on that piece of Arizona land, the porch where Samuel and Victoria had spent so many evenings, still offering a view of the same red rocks and distant mountains. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set in shades of orange and gold, those who knew the story could almost see them there, Two figures on the porch, holding hands and watching the landscape that had become their home. Their story became more than just family history. It became a testament to the truth of Samuel's words on that hot August day in 1876. In the West, in the vastness and possibility of that wild land, people really could start fresh. They could leave behind shame and sorrow and build something new and beautiful. They could transform from broken to whole, from alone to beloved, from past haunted to future focused. Victoria had arrived in Fort Bowie crying about her past, expecting judgment and rejection. Instead, she had found acceptance, love, and the space to become the person she was always meant to be. Samuel had offered her that first act of kindness, those simple words that changed everything, and together they had built a life that honored the best in both of them. Their love story, born from pain but transformed into joy, became a beacon for others who struggled with their own pasts, their own shame, their own need for redemption. And the lesson endured through the generations, that no matter what has happened before, no matter how broken we might feel, there is always the possibility of starting fresh, of choosing love over judgment, of building something beautiful from the raw materials of courage and hope. In the end, that was the true gift that Samuel and Victoria Grant gave to each other and to all who came after them. They proved that the past does not have to define us, that shame can be overcome, that love can heal even the deepest wounds. They showed that two imperfect people, choosing each other with open hearts and clear eyes, can create something that lasts beyond their own lifetimes. "We all start fresh out here," Samuel had said, and in saying those words, he had given Victoria not just a place to live, but a reason to live. Together, they had taken that fresh start and turned it into a legacy of love, family, and enduring hope that would inspire generations to come. Their story, beginning with tears and fear, ending with a love that transcended death itself, remained a reminder that in the vast openness of both land and heart, there was always room for second chances, always space for redemption, always the possibility of finding home in the most unexpected places.